The fluorescent lights hummed overhead like they were counting down to something. Megan O'Brien stepped through the employee entrance of St. Michael's Hospital at 11:24 p.m., her badge already clipped to her scrubs, and nobody looked up. That was exactly how she wanted it. The night shift smelled like stale coffee and antiseptic, that chemical burn that coated the back of your throat after 8 hours. She'd been here for 14 months. 14 months of being invisible, which meant 14 months of doing her actual job, the one nobody knew about. The nursing was the cover. The cover was the mission. And the mission was room for 12. Staff Sergeant Marcus Webb lay in that room 3 floors up, recovering from open-heart surgery, and Megan was here because someone at the Pentagon had decided he needed watching. Not doctors. Not regular security. Someone who understood what he'd witnessed in Baghdad 2004, someone who could recognize if his condition was being monitored or if his file was being accessed by the wrong people. Megan understood those things better than most. She'd lived 14 months of a different life to prove it. She moved through the corridors with the kind of competence that made people's eyes slide past her. Quiet. Efficient. The sort of nurse you forgot you'd seen. Her hands, steady on the cart she pushed toward the med station, bore scars that didn't match a civilian nursing career, thin white lines across her knuckles from shrapnel that had scattered across a street in Fallujah, a deeper mark on her wrist from a field tourniquet that had stayed on too long. She'd let them show during interviews. Nobody asked about old injuries. Nobody cared where hands had been before they clipped on a hospital badge. The weight of the challenge coin pressed against her scrub pocket, tarnished silver that caught no light anymore. She touched it once as she passed the night supervisor's desk, muscle memory from a different life, from standing in a CR-17 transport and knowing she might not come home. The supervisor didn't notice. Nobody noticed these things. Room for 12 was stable. Webb's vitals showed on the monitor, heart rate 68, blood pressure holding at 122/81, O2 sat running steady at 97% on 2 liters. The surgical reconstruction had held. The post-op period was progressing normally. No signs of tampering, no unusual visitors on the log, no concerning fluctuations in his records. Megan made a note in the chart, her handwriting precise and unremarkable, and moved on to the other patient she was assigned. 6 rooms. 12 beds. 8 hours of being nobody special. That was where she should have stayed. That was the job. But at 6:13 a.m., during grand rounds, Dr. Caldwell arrived like a man walking into a room that belonged to him, because he believed it did. He moved through the hallway with the kind of confidence that came from family money and 3 decades of politics, from board meetings in mahogany rooms where the other doctors were related to him or owed him favors. His voice carried the particular weight of someone who'd never been told no. 20 residents followed him in a formal procession, and Megan stepped to the side of the corridor to let them pass, becoming part of the wall like all the other nurses. She held Webb's chart in her hands, ready to present his overnight status when asked. She did this 3 times a week, smoothly and without elaboration. Caldwell stopped at Webb's bed. He was a tall man, the kind of tall that seemed designed to make him look down at people, with silver hair that had probably never been disarranged and a surgeon's hands that looked like they'd never done anything as crude as actual surgery. He reviewed the monitors, reviewed the post-op orders, and then his eyes landed on the medication administration record. Who ordered the beta blocker increase? His voice was flat. Not loud, not yet. Just flat enough to make everyone in the room pay attention. I did, doctor. Megan stepped forward, already prepared for this. His heart rate was trending up overnight. 74, 76 at 3:38 a.m. Given the post-op cardiac reconstruction, I flagged it for physician review and suggested the increase based on his preoperative baseline. The residents watched. She could feel their eyes like weight. Caldwell's expression didn't change, but something shifted in his jaw. You suggested. You flagged. You review parameters. He turned to face her directly, and the corridor went quiet. Interesting that you're capable of such sophisticated clinical judgment. Nurses typically stick to bedpans and vitals. The silence after that statement was clean and precise. Megan stood motionless, her hand steady on the chart. Her jaw didn't clench. Her breathing didn't accelerate. She simply waited, the way you wait during a firefight when there's nothing to do but let the moment pass. His beta-blocker dose should have been my decision alone, Caldwell continued, and now his voice had teeth in it. Not a recommendation from the bedside. If you ever directly contradict my medication orders during rounds again, I will have security escort you out of this hospital. Am I clear? Yes, doctor. Two attendings stood by the vending machines at the hallway's far end, and Megan heard one of them snicker, the sound carried easily through the morning air. Nurses playing doctor, the other one said, too quiet for Caldwell to hear, loud enough for everyone else. They exchanged a look that was supposed to be privately hilarious, the kind of look that only worked if you believed nobody else in the room mattered. Caldwell returned to his rounds, and the procession of residents moved down the corridor with him. Webb watched from his bed, his eyes tracking Megan with the kind of intensity that meant he'd heard every word, understood every nuance of what had just happened, and was cataloguing it the way a soldier catalogues threats. She didn't acknowledge his gaze. She already couldn't acknowledge anything. The supply closet at the end of the hallway became her destination at 7:06 a.m. when she had 7 minutes before shift change. She'd just finished her charting, just completed her hand-off notes, and she needed 2 minutes alone with the sounds of hospital machinery filtered through concrete walls. The closet was narrow and cool and smelled like bleach and the artificial lemon of cleaning solutions. Shelves stacked with gauze and tape and trauma shears in sterile wrappers. Megan stood still for a breath, just one, her hand against one of the shelves. That was a field decompression technique. She turned. Webb stood in the doorway, moving carefully, still restricted from exertion but clearly determined. He was 62, lean in the way that came from decades of staying combat-ready, and his eyes held the specific knowledge of someone who'd done that exact medical procedure in a place where hospitals were airstrike targets. "I know that technique," he said quietly. "I learned it in Baghdad 2004. Trained some of the battalion's medics myself. You executed it perfectly during rounds, your clinical assessment, the way you presented the parameters. That's not something they teach in civilian nursing school." Megan's hand found the challenge coin in her pocket. Just for a moment. Just so her fingers could touch something that meant what she was real. "You're confused from the pain medication," she said, her voice flat and professional. "Sometimes post-op patients experience disorientation. I'll make a note in your chart." Webb studied her for one heartbeat longer, then stepped back into the corridor. He didn't say anything else. He didn't need to. He'd asked the question. She'd answered. That was how these things worked between people who'd been to the same places and lived through the same things. You didn't need sentences. You just needed recognition. By 7:31 a.m., Megan had clocked out and was walking to her car in the pre-dawn darkness. The Houston humidity had settled over the parking lot like a weight, and the sky was starting to bleed from black into dark blue. She'd made it 14 months without anyone looking past the scrubs. 14 months of Webb not knowing who she was, not knowing why she was here, not knowing she'd taken a bullet meant for him in Baghdad too and only lived because the field medic had been faster than the insurgent's trigger finger. She touched the challenge coin one more time as she reached her car. Webb's challenge coin, from the same unit, matching the wear patterns of a coin that had been carried in a cargo pocket through 2 decades of questioning why some people came home and others didn't. The job was simple: stay invisible. Stay quiet. Keep Webb alive until someone official came to get him. But the look in his eyes in that supply closet had carried the weight of someone who knew exactly what they'd just seen. And the vending machine laughter had carried the kind of contempt that made people dangerous, because they felt justified. And Caldwell's voice, that flat, certain voice, had contained the specific certainty of a man who'd just realized that someone in his hospital knew enough to threaten the careful hierarchy he'd spent 30 years building. The call came at 8:24 p.m., Dr. Caldwell's voice traveling through the hospital switchboard like a knife finding soft tissue. He was at a dinner party in the Heights, the kind with wine that cost more than Megan's monthly rent, and he was talking about her to people who mattered. Board members. Donors. The hospital's financial lifeblood. His tone was conversational, almost concerned, the most dangerous way to destroy someone. Yes, I'm just curious about her credentials, he said to whoever held the phone on the other end. Her nursing school references, specifically. When you spoke with them, did they mention any disciplinary issues? Any gaps in her training? Because I'm seeing some concerning patterns in her clinical decision-making, and I want to make sure we're not dealing with a gap in her foundational education. The pause on the other end was audible even from where Megan stood in the medication room, pretending to inventory syringes. She heard his exhale, the sound of a man lighting a cigarette, the clink of a glass being refilled. No, I'm not making an accusation. I'm being thorough. That's what leadership means. She continued counting. 47, 48. 49, her hands moved with the mechanical precision of someone who had learned long ago that emotion was a luxury. The challenge coin in her pocket felt heavier than it should, a tarnished metal disc the size of her thumb, engraved with an eagle and the words Baghdad 2004. She didn't touch it. Not here. Not where anyone could see. By 10:13 p.m., the investigator had arrived. His name was Harrison Pierce, and he carried a leather briefcase that looked like it had survived actual warfare. His suit cost more than Megan's car. He moved through the hospital like he owned the deed, flanked by two administrators whose faces had gone the specific shade of white that came with federal scrutiny. They found Megan restocking the crash cart on the third floor, where the ICU hummed with the particular loneliness of the graveyard shift. Ms. O'Brien. Not a question. A summons. I'm an investigator from the Texas Medical Licensing Board. We need to discuss several documented policy violations filed by Dr. Caldwell this evening. She turned. One motion. Hand steady. Eyes level. Of course, she said. Just those two words. Her voice had dropped an octave without her meaning it to, the voice of someone who had learned that fewer words meant fewer mistakes. Pierce opened his briefcase. The documents inside were organized with the precision of someone who had built careers on paper trails. Unsigned medication orders. Procedural deviations. A notation about the needle decompression she performed on Marcus Webb, filed as unauthorized emergency intervention rather than what it actually was, a life-saving procedure that kept a man's heart from drowning in its own fluid. These are serious allegations, Pierce said. He was studying her face for cracks. For tears. For the kind of panic that came with the realization that institutional power had turned against you. Dr. Caldwell provided extensive documentation of his concerns about your competency. He's been quite thorough. Megan read through the stack. Each page was a lie built on half-truths, the way institutional weapons always worked. Technically accurate dates. Technically documented incidents. Technically within policy to question her judgment. But the shape of it, the relentless architecture of it, was pure destruction. I understand, she said. Do you want to respond to these allegations? She looked at him. Really looked. Saw the certainty in his bearing, the kind that came from having never been wrong before, from having spent 20 years as the system's instrument rather than its victim. Not yet, she said. By 11:22 p.m., her badge was deactivated. The security chief, a retired Navy man named Holloway who had spent 30 years as a surface warfare officer before trading his khakis for a radio and a uniform that felt like an apology, walked her to the exit personally. He didn't want to. His jaw was set the way jaws got when someone was swallowing rage, but he had his orders from administration, and orders were orders. That was a language they both spoke. The parking lot rain was hammering down, the kind of storm that made you understand why Houston was sinking. Megan's scrubs were already soaked by the time they reached the employee entrance. Behind them, framed in the second-floor window, Dr. Caldwell watched. She didn't turn around to confirm it, but she could feel his presence the way you could feel a weapon pointed at your back. He was looking down at her departure the way a general looked at a battle won. 40 seconds of satisfaction before he moved on to the next strategic advantage. I'm sorry, Holloway said quietly. I know that doesn't mean anything, but I am. She understood. He was a good man caught in a system that rewarded the ruthless. Megan walked to her car, a 2009 Honda Civic that had made the trip from San Diego to Houston 3 years ago when the assignment began. She didn't start the engine. Not yet. She sat in the driver's seat with her hands on the steering wheel and thought about the hospital. About Webb upstairs in the ICU, recovering from his gunshot wound, separated from her by the simple fact that she no longer had a badge to swipe. About the reason she was there in the first place. The mission wasn't over. Staff Sergeant Marcus Webb was the last surviving witness to what had happened in Baghdad in 2004. The incident that had never been officially acknowledged, the one that lived in classified files and closed briefings, the one that had required her to spend 3 years working night shifts as a nurse in Houston, monitoring his heart, documenting his patterns, waiting for the moment when someone finally came looking for him. And they would come. The people who had reason to want him dead, the ones who profited from what he'd seen, were still looking. And now she couldn't be there when they found him. The rain hammered against the windshield like ammunition. Somewhere inside St. Michael's, Webb was sleeping. His chest wound was healing. His guard was down. And she was sitting in a parking garage with an inactive badge and a career that had just evaporated under institutional pressure that moved with the precision of a tactical strike. Megan reached into her pocket and felt the challenge coin. The tarnished silver, worn smooth by 19 years of carrying it. The last thing connecting her to who she had been before the cover, before the scrubs, before she learned how to be invisible. She should have left. Should have driven to the safe house that had been arranged for extraction if the cover blew, filled out the debrief forms, and accepted that the mission was compromised. That was protocol. That was what any intelligent operator did. But protocol had never accounted for the fact that she would see someone like Webb, someone who had been there on the streets of Fallujah when the shooting started, someone who carried the same weight of knowing, and decide that some orders were made to be broken. Megan started the engine. She pulled out of the parking lot and drove toward the highway, toward the lights of Houston at 1:38 a.m., and allowed herself exactly 4 minutes to understand that what she was about to do would end her career in military intelligence. After that, she stopped thinking about consequences and started thinking about solutions. Because somewhere in that hospital, a man who had already been shot once in a war that nobody acknowledged was still in danger. And the only person who understood exactly how much danger was sitting in a Honda Civic in the rain. The road ahead stretched empty and dark, and Megan O'Brien had learned a long time ago how to operate in the spaces where nobody was looking. The evening shift was running quiet when the doors to Webb's ICU room shattered inward. Not unlocked. Not opened. Shattered. The gunman came through like someone who'd already decided the cost didn't matter, Glock 19 raised, both hands steady, eyes locked on the bed where Marcus Webb was still connected to 3 separate phone lines and a cardiac monitor that was about to document something it shouldn't have to. Megan heard the glass break from the medication station 40 feet down the hall. She moved. Not ran. Moved the way operators move, economical, direct, no wasted motion. Her badge was already deactivated. She wasn't supposed to be here. She was definitely not supposed to respond. She responded anyway. The gunman didn't even see her until she was between him and the bed. Just stepped into the space where a bullet would have to go through her first, her hands already raised, her voice dropping 2 octaves into something that stopped him mid-breath. You don't want this. It wasn't a request. It was a command delivered by someone who'd made similar statements in 3 different time zones, and the gunman's trigger finger actually hesitated. 1/10 of a second. Just enough time for him to recognize that the person blocking his target wasn't some terrified nurse, she was something else entirely, something his hindbrain recognized as dangerous even if his conscious mind couldn't process why. Then he fired. Not hesitation. Certainty. The first round caught her in the shoulder, spinning her half-turn, but she didn't stumble. Didn't cry out. The second shot came while she was still rotating, catching her high abdomen as she twisted, and she felt the impact like someone had driven a fist through her ribs. Blood spread across the white portion of her scrubs in real time, dark and spreading like water through cotton. She didn't look down. Her eyes never left his. The third round found her hip as she moved toward Webb's bed, not away from the gunman, toward her patient. She was shielding with her body the way you shield a position. The fourth shot entered her thigh and her leg buckled, but she was already pushing the hospital bed with her free hand, her back still toward the gun, her entire physiology screaming at her to collapse, to stop, to do anything but move. The fifth round hit her chest. Upper left. Subclavicular. The kind of shot that ended people. She didn't end. Not yet. She shoved the bed one final time, clearing the doorway with Webb's for stand still attached, her body folding like something mechanical running out of power. The room went dead silent except for the sound of blood hitting linoleum and the cardiac monitor's steady beeping, a metronome of a heartbeat that wasn't hers. Wasn't even close to being hers. The gunman stood in the shattered doorway, weapon still raised, watching her collapse, waiting for her to stop moving. She did. There on the floor of Webb's ICU room, surrounded by the detritus of a life she was no longer living, her badge somewhere in her car, her credentials destroyed, her cover erased, her blood pooling beneath the fluorescent lights in a hospital that no longer wanted her. The siren wailed from the parking lot 3 minutes later. Code Blue, trauma team called, but not for Webb. For the nurse who'd thrown herself between a dying man and the bullets meant for him. For the woman who'd spent 19 years learning how to operate in silence and had just announced herself in 5 gunshots and the absolute certainty of someone who'd already survived worse. Through the haze of shock and blood loss, Megan heard voices. Multiple voices. Boots on tile. The sounds of an emergency response colliding with institutional chaos, everyone shouting about the ICU, about the shooting, about the nurse who'd been fired that morning and was bleeding out on the floor anyway. Someone was screaming into a radio about a second trauma bay. Her vision was graying at the edges. She could taste copper. Her shoulder felt like it was on fire and her leg had gone numb, which was worse because it meant the damage was deeper than the pain could tell her. She'd assessed enough combat injuries to know what she was looking at. Hemorrhagic shock. Approximately 4 to 6 minutes before systemic collapse. Time enough to know you're dying. Time enough to wonder if it was worth it. Webb's voice came from somewhere above her, shaking but awake. Nightingale. No. No, stay with me. Stay with. She didn't have the strength to tell him the mission was complete. That he'd survived. That she'd done exactly what she was put here to do, and it didn't matter what happened to her body now because the asset was secure and the classified incident from Baghdad would stay classified and nobody would ever connect the dots because the edges went gray. Then black. Then nothing. 5 hours later, her eyes opened to the inside of a Honda Civic parked in the hospital's basement garage. Engine dead. Head pressed against the steering wheel. Dried blood cracking on her skin like old paint. No memory of how she'd gotten there. No memory of leaving the trauma bay or stealing scrubs or moving at all. Just the absolute blank of a body shutting down its systems to survive, her unconscious mind operating on protocols older than her rank, older than her name, the survival algorithms that had kept her alive through 5 tours of a war nobody was supposed to talk about. The parking garage lights flickered overhead, casting everything in sickly yellow. Her phone was somewhere. Her gun was somewhere. Her entire identity was scattered like shrapnel across a hospital that was about to change everything it thought it knew about a nurse named Megan O'Brien. And 370 miles away, a secure Pentagon phone was ringing with a call that would eventually put 75 combat veterans on a helicopter to Houston because someone at JSOC had just figured out why their missing operative had gone silent. The parking garage was a tomb of concrete and shadow. Megan's forehead rested against the steering wheel, dried blood cracking like rust across her skin. Rain hammered the windshield in sheets. The engine was dead. She had no memory of driving here. No memory of leaving the hospital. No memory of anything after the gunshots. 5 hours had vanished. She lifted her head slowly. The movement sent electricity down her left shoulder, not pain yet, but the kind of awareness that comes before pain arrives. Her scrubs were stiff with blood. The fabric stuck to her ribs. She looked down at her hands gripping the wheel and watched them shake, not from fear but from something deeper, something her nervous system was doing without her permission. Shock, her training whispered. Your body is shutting down. You've lost significant volume. Get to a hospital. But she was supposed to be protecting a hospital. Megan's eyes closed. The parking garage tilted slightly. She forced her vision to focus on the digital clock on the dashboard. 5:33 p.m. That meant the shooting had happened at, she calculated backwards through the fog, and the numbers wouldn't stick. Her brain felt like it was operating through wet gauze. Webb had been stable. She remembered that. She remembered the hiss of air escaping when she decompressed his chest, remembered the O2 sat climbing, 75, 82, 88, into the 90s. Sinus rhythm. The monitors had confirmed it. Her hands had moved through the procedure with the muscle memory of 50 field operations, each motion automatic, each decision crystallized by years of keeping soldiers alive in places where the only anesthesia was adrenaline. And then the door had swung open. She remembered the gunman's face. She remembered the Glock 19 because her training had catalogued it automatically: caliber, magazine capacity, effective range, useless information when the rounds were already traveling toward her patient. She had stepped sideways without thinking. Her body had made the choice that her mind wouldn't have allowed. The first round caught her shoulder. The impact wasn't pain, it was information. She had grabbed Webb's bed and pushed. The second round went through her abdomen. The third fragmented her hip. Blood was spreading across her scrubs. The fourth round, she could feel where it had gone, a vertical line of fire down her thigh. The fifth punched through her chest. She had collapsed. And now she was alone in a dead car in a parking garage at 5:33 p.m. with no idea how she had gotten here. Megan's hand moved to her ribs, pressing against the wet fabric. Her fingers came away with blood that was already beginning to dry into brown. She was still bleeding, but slowly. That was good. That was survivable. She needed to move. She needed to check on Webb. She needed to. The radio crackled to life on the dashboard. She flinched. Her hand went automatically to where her service weapon would have been if she had worn one. But nurses don't carry guns, and that's all she was supposed to be. That's all anyone at St. Michael's could know. She reached for the dial to turn off the static, her shoulder screaming in protest, and that's when she heard the television. It was coming from somewhere inside the hospital. The lobby, maybe. Or the break room down the corridor. The volume was low, but it carried through the concrete like a voice calling her name. Breaking news from Houston, where a decorated combat medic remains missing after an incident at St. Michael's Hospital this afternoon. The nurse, identified as Master Chief Petty Officer Megan O'Brien, was shot 5 times while protecting a patient during an active shooter situation. Hospital security footage shows her stepping between the gunman and veteran patient Staff Sergeant Marcus Webb before collapsing. She has not been seen since emergency responders arrived on the scene. The Pentagon has not yet issued a statement, but sources tell CNN that O'Brien was involved in classified operations spanning 3 continents. The photograph on the screen was her. Not her nursing photo. Not the bland headshot from her employee file. It was her in dress blues from 14 years ago, hair pulled back, eyes that hadn't learned yet how to hide what they had seen. Decorated Master Chief Petty Officer missing after Houston shooting. Megan's breathing changed. Not faster. Slower. The kind of controlled oxygen intake she had learned to do when her heart rate spiked, when her body tried to panic and her training grabbed it by the spine and held it still. Her operational security was compromised. Her cover identity was blown across every news network in the United States. Anyone who had been watching her, and there were people watching her, there were always people watching, now knew exactly what she was. They knew her real name. They knew her rank. They knew she was missing. And they knew she had a patient to protect. Megan's hand went to her pocket. The tarnished military challenge coin was still there, the metal cool against her palm. She had carried it for 19 years. She had carried it through 2 deployments, through 3 field promotions, through a marriage that couldn't survive the secrets she kept. Marcus Webb had one just like it. They had been minted from the same aircraft wreckage in Kabul, given to the survivors of an operation that had no official designation and no files anywhere that could be accessed. The coin was the only proof that what happened had been real. She should throw it away. The moment her identity went public, the moment the news broadcast her photograph across the country, the coin became a liability. It connected her to Webb. It connected her to operations that were still classified. It connected her to the reason she had been in this hospital pretending to be someone she wasn't. Megan held the coin in her hand and thought about what happened next. The Pentagon would send someone. Protocol said they would extract her, debrief her, reassign her. Or they would leave her. There was a protocol for that too. If an operative's cover was burned and the operative was injured, and if the mission parameters had shifted beyond recovery, the operator became a liability. She had trained for that scenario. She had accepted it when she took the oath. She was expendable. The rain hit the windshield like applause. Megan pressed her head back against the seat and closed her eyes. Her shoulder throbbed. Her abdomen burned. Her hip felt like fractured bone held together with wire. The bleeding had slowed to something manageable but not safe. She was in shock. Her body temperature was dropping. She needed medical attention from someone who wasn't her. But walking into that hospital would mean questions. Walking into that hospital would mean explaining why she had disappeared. Walking into that hospital would mean admitting that Master Chief Petty Officer Megan O'Brien was real. She could stay in the car. She could sit here until the bleeding stopped or didn't. She could let her cover stay buried. She could let Marcus Webb think she was just a nurse who had made a heroic choice. That was cleaner. That was kinder. But then she remembered Webb's hand grabbing her wrist as she collapsed. She remembered his voice, hoarse from oxygen deprivation and blood loss, whispering the call sign that only 3 people in the world knew she answered to. "Nightingale," he had said. "I know who you are." And she had pulled away. She had walked out of that hospital and straight into the parking garage and her car, and her body had made the decision to shut down because the mission was compromised and the asset was secure and there was nothing left for Nightingale to do. 5 hours later, the world knew. The news had figured it out faster than the Pentagon. The media had connected the dots between a night shift nurse's surgical competence and a classified operative's missing file. They had reconstructed her from pieces, and now she was scattered everywhere. Now she was legend and liability and the worst thing her handlers could have hoped for. Megan opened her eyes and looked at the tarnished coin resting in her palm. Marcus Webb had said her name like a prayer. Like it meant something to him that she was real. Like her sacrifice had cost something that mattered. She closed her fingers around the coin and held it against her chest. That's when she heard it. Distant at first, so distant it could have been thunder. But thunder doesn't have rhythm. Thunder doesn't have purpose. Megan's training recognized it before her consciousness did, the unmistakable percussive thud of helicopter rotors cutting through the Houston rain. Boots on tile. 1, 2, 3, 4. The sound was coming closer. Not from the parking garage. From inside the hospital. Multiple boots. Formation movement. The kind of precision that only came from people trained to move as a single organism. Megan pressed her forehead against the steering wheel again and waited. The military had found her. The question was whether they had come to rescue her or relieve her of the burden of living with what she knew. Either way, the nurse named Megan O'Brien was about to stop existing. The Master Chief Petty Officer was coming home. The hospital lobby television was broadcasting breaking news when 75 Special Forces operators in formation walked through the entrance. CNN displayed her military photo with the caption glowing behind them, "Decorated Master Chief Petty Officer missing after Houston shooting." The youngest operator, barely 26, his face hard as riveted steel, spoke her code name like a prayer into the silence. Nightingale. One word. The room didn't just go quiet, it contracted. 75 pairs of boots on tile. 1, 2, 3, 4. The rhythm of muscle memory walking into a hospital corridor like it was a combat landing zone. The security chief, a retired Navy E-7 who'd spent 18 years in ballistic helmets and body armor before trading them for a walkie-talkie and a regulation blue shirt, stood from his desk. His hand rose in a salute that made every nurse and doctor in the lobby feel the weight of something they didn't have words for. Attention! His voice carried through 3 floors. Conversations died. Clipboards lowered. Master Chief Petty Officer Megan O'Brien. United States Navy. Present arms. The operators moved in perfect unison, hands to chests. The salute held for 5 seconds that felt like 5 years. A 2-star general stepped forward, his dress blues adorned with decorations that caught the fluorescent light like accumulated prayers. He pulled a folder from his aide's hands and opened it. 14 overseas deployments. Baghdad, Helmand, Kandahar, Mosul. His voice didn't ask permission from the room, it claimed the space. 37 lives saved under fire. Combat Medicine Badge with Gold Star. 2 Navy Commendation Medals. Silver Star. He paused. The silence filled with what those words meant. Medal of Honor recommended. Pending review. He closed the folder. That's who you fired. Dr. Caldwell appeared on the mezzanine overlooking the lobby. His face drained of color like someone had opened a valve and let his confidence pour out onto the tile floor. His hands gripped the railing. His mouth moved but nothing came out. Because he'd just understood something with the precision of a surgeon recognizing their own handiwork, the investigator he'd weaponized against Megan, the one who'd arrived with his briefcase full of policy violations and falsified complaints, had uncovered something far more valuable. That investigator had dug into Caldwell's own records. Surgical outcomes that didn't match his reports. Medicare billings that doubled his documented patient load. A pattern of falsified credentials stretching back 9 years and $43,000 in fraudulent claims. Marcus Webb was rolled into the lobby on his hospital bed, still connected to monitors, still moving with the careful deliberation of a man who'd been shot and was rebuilding himself one breath at a time. His eyes found Megan's across 75 uniformed bodies. He reached into the bedside pocket with his left hand, his right still heavily bandaged, and pulled out a coin. Tarnished silver. Worn smooth by 19 years of a man's hand rubbing its surface in the dark. He held it up. "She has one just like this," he said. His voice was steady as a combat medic's should be. "It's from Baghdad. 2004, I took a bullet meant for someone else that day. She took one meant for me the night I came back through that emergency room door." He placed the coin on his chest where his heart was beating underneath the monitors and gauze. "She's always been saving us. Long before tonight." The 2-star general moved to Dr. Caldwell. He didn't climb the stairs. He just looked up at the mezzanine the way a man looks at something he's deciding whether to acknowledge. "Doctor, your career is being reviewed by federal investigators. Your medical license is suspended effective immediately. And you're about to have a conversation with the FBI that will determine whether you spend the next 7 to 15 years explaining your billing practices to people who have significantly less patience than I do right now." The general's voice had the weight of someone used to commanding men's fates. "You can either come down those stairs on your own, or my people will come up and get you. Those are your options." Caldwell tried to run. He actually tried to run from the mezzanine toward his office. One of the operators simply stepped into the stairwell and waited. Caldwell stopped. His breath came in panic gasps. He turned back toward the railing and shouted, actually screamed, accusations at Megan that dissolved into profanity. His voice cracked. His hand shook. He accused her of sabotaging him, of conspiring with the military, of fraudulently claiming credentials. A nurse he'd once publicly humiliated was now watching him unravel from the center of the lobby while 75 warriors stood in witness. 2 FBI agents appeared at the entrance, badges catching light like a punctuation mark. They cuffed Caldwell as he descended the stairs, his voice still breaking, still denying, still trying to explain away what the numbers had already confessed. 6 months later, Megan was driving through northwest Houston near the intersection of two commercial strips when she saw him. Dr. Caldwell. Not operating. Not consulting. Sitting at a folding table between a nail salon and a pawn shop, selling supplemental insurance policies. The name tag on his polo shirt read, Steve. When she walked past, his eyes dropped to the pavement. He didn't look up. His hands trembled as he straightened a pamphlet that didn't need straightening. She didn't stop. She didn't acknowledge him. True class is what you do when the lights go out. She kept walking. That evening, Megan stood in Marcus Webb's living room surrounded by 75 warriors who'd answered a single code name spoken in a hospital lobby and gotten on helicopters without asking why. Webb had recovered enough to stand, though the pain lived in his movements like an unwanted passenger. The tarnished challenge coin, his coin, sat on the mantle where he'd placed it that morning. She pulled her own coin from her pocket. 19 years of Baghdad lived on its surface. She set it beside his. Two pieces of metal that had survived what words could never carry. Neither of them said anything. Webb's hand found her shoulder. The grip was steady. A combat medic's grip. Acknowledgement without need for explanation. Her shoulder still ached under the scar tissue. The bullet that had taken her through the anterior deltoid muscle had been specifically aimed. The one through her abdomen, deflected slightly by her ribs, had been meant to end the conversation permanently. But she was still here. Still breathing. The trembling that someone might have expected never came. It wasn't fear. It was restraint. The discipline of a master chief watching her patient survive. The discipline of a trained operator understanding that the mission was complete. What would you have done if you discovered the person you tried to destroy was the exact person you needed saving from? Comment below. And if you think true heroism sometimes wears scrubs instead of medals, like and subscribe.